This happened to my friend and I on New Year's Eve. Now, I'm a person who prefers Christmas to New Year's, but as I had recently become single, a month or so before, I decided to go out with my friends and bring in the New Year's in style. Like the saying goes, new year, new start. That was my thought process at the time. We had tickets to go to one of the main clubs in our area, where they were throwing their usual New Year's Eve party with a few special guests. And I'd heard from previous years that this New Year's Eve event was the best one to attend. And with what they charged for the tickets, I sure hoped so. It came to the night, and we were starting early that evening. The club itself was opening their doors at 6 p.m. But firstly, we were meeting up at my friend's house to have some pre-drinks and to get ready all together. We wanted to be feeling pretty tipsy before heading out and play some drinking games. I don't usually do the whole clubbing scene, and I was pretty content with a house party as I knew how busy and overcrowded the club was going to be. But I thought one night wouldn't hurt, and my friends wanted me out and thought it would be good to meet some new women to get over my ex. After many shots and a few games of beer pong, we were ready to go and made our way out to the club before we got to the point we were too drunk to get in. Luckily, we didn't live far, and we got a lift, as waiting for a cab would be a joke with wait times nearing an hour. As we arrived, we joined the long winding queue. It was 8:30 p.m., and as expected, it was already heaving. We had our tickets, but obviously we still had to queue to get in, so the night's air kinda did us good and sobered us up a bit before we reached the front. As we finally entered after about a half-hour wait, we saw the club was full of people having a good time and dancing, drinks spilling everywhere and drunk faces all over the place. We headed to the bar to get some more drinks, and again, that was another wait as the queue to the bar was also quite long. I could see how this night was gonna be, but we decided to just order extra drinks to save us from having to queue up again. And in all fairness, that worked. After we had all got our drinks and were settled, I was having a good time. My friend Alex introduced me to a woman he knew from work, and we hung out with her for a while and her group of friends. I got to talking to one of her friends who I was getting on with, but later found out she had a boyfriend when she went off to meet him as he had just arrived. So that was annoying and unexpected, but I didn't let it bother me as I was there to have a good time with my friends. It was nearing midnight, and I was feeling pretty drunk, to the point the room was spinning. My friend Alex felt the same, so we told the other two in our group that after the New Year countdown, we were gonna call it a night and head back to Alex's. They didn't want to leave and were gonna stay, which was cool. As the countdown happened, we all celebrated, drinks flying everywhere and pyrotechnics filling the room. We said our goodbyes and headed off. There was no chance of getting a lift back, and the cab, like I said, would have taken forever due to the time and plus the extra charge just because it was New Year's, so we decided we'd walk back. Alex didn't live too far, and we knew a shortcut through an abandoned construction site. So we made our way back and headed to a shortcut. When we got to the site, we squeezed through the side gate onto the site. It was pitch black, but it would be a straight walk through there, which would bring us to the other side and shave a lot of time off our journey back. Being abandoned, not sure of the reason why. It was eerie, the half-finished buildings so open and the darkness causing our already drunken minds to play tricks on us, feeling like we were seeing figures in the shadows. I don't know why, but I felt on edge as we walked through. But Alex insisted it would be fine, and he'd walked through there plenty of times at night. As we neared one of the buildings, the silence was broken by a loud bang. A firework went off in the distance, the noise scaring the crap out of us, my heart pounding as I calmed down and laughed with Alex about the inconvenient timing of the damn fireworks. But my laughter was then cut short. I told Alex to be quiet for a second as I could hear what sounded like banging close to us. We listened and looked into the distance of where it seemed to be coming from. And as I looked, I saw it. A parked up car, lights off, sitting there seemingly empty. The banging continued, and without a doubt, the noise was coming from that car. Curious, and now slightly concerned, Myself and Alex, without talking to one another, looked around to see if anyone else was about. There was no one. We slowly headed over to the car, the banging becoming more prominent. But as we neared, our pulses began to race as we could now hear the sound of what seemed like a mumbling shout. The inside of the car was empty, but this sound and the banging was coming from the trunk. With the banging and the muffled screams, my mind was racing as I was under no illusion as to what was in there. We had to try to open it. It seemed like a surreal moment, but if it was what I thought it was, we couldn't just walk away now. My hand shook as I reached out for the handle of the trunk. It clicked. To our surprise, it was unlocking. Alex, next to me, grabbed the trunk lid and we both stared at each other with the same freaked and scared expression on our faces. He then lifted the trunk, and what we saw shocked us. There was a woman tied up with her mouth gagged, makeup smeared down her face from where she had been crying. I still remember the look on her face, how she looked back at us in fear. Panic going into overdrive, I looked around fearing someone was behind us, my adrenaline surging, whilst Alex untied the woman and took the cloth from her mouth, pulling her up, her voice trembling as she told us that she'd been abducted whilst walking home from a club she had been at that night. This situation had made me stone cold sober as my heart pounded. I grabbed my phone to call the police. It was then fear hit me like a ton of bricks. Two loud, booming male voices echoed from the distance, shouting at us. The woman screamed as Alex grabbed her. I turned to see two heavy-set men in masks running towards us from the distance, my fight-or-flight mode kicking in and flight truly winning. Fearing for our lives, we knew we couldn't let the men reach us, so we sprinted for our lives. With the woman, we ran back the way we came as fast as we could. Unable to control myself, I looked back over my shoulder, seeing one of the men still chasing us. The bright beam of headlights hit my eyes, and the sound of a car revving made my skin crawl. The other man was in the car, now screeching towards us. I had never been so scared in my life. The gate we came through, just a few feet away from us. As Alex and the woman reached it and lunged through, I quickly followed, throwing myself to the other side. The man was still chasing us. I honestly thought we were going to get caught, but in that moment, to my amazement, in the distance pulling up in front of us was the welcoming sight of red and blue lights. A police car had pulled up, as the officers patrolling had seen us climbing through a no-entry zone. I turned to look behind me. The men chasing us had gone, disappeared back through the gate, and obviously back to his accomplice in the car, as we heard it pulling away. The sight of the police was honestly the best thing I could have asked for right then and there. At first, they assumed we were breaking and entering and messing around, but as soon as we explained the terrifying situation and they listened to the poor woman, they called it in and searched the area, looking for those two assholes that I'm pretty sure would not have let us leave that site alive. The events of that night horrified me, and I can only imagine what the woman we found must have been going through. We still keep in touch now, and thankfully she's doing well and has moved on with her life. I still think of it to this day. The men were never caught, and from all the information gathered and what the woman told the police that night, we most likely intercepted an abduction for a trafficking operation that night. We were just lucky the men were not around when we stumbled upon the car, and no matter how much it scared us, I'm glad it happened, as we saved that woman's life that night. Please remember, never leave someone walk home alone. It still scares me to this day. What a way to start off a new year. This event happened to me on New Year's Eve a few years back, in my hometown of Portland, Oregon. For some backstory, I'm a female and was 25 at the time this happened. I was working as a supervisor at a local bar that I'd been working at for the past year. Christmas and New Year's were always busy times of the year. But New Year's wasn't a holiday I was really bothered about. I'd much rather have Christmas off than New Year's. So I was down to work the New Year's Eve shift and bring in the new year with a busy long night. As you probably know, it's one of the most hectic nights of the year, especially in a bar environment. We were nothing fancy, so tickets weren't needed to get in, and the bar would consist of mostly regulars anyway. We were typically short-staffed that night, and my manager was off celebrating the holidays, so I had to make do with the staff we had and get stuck in. Working in that type of place, you see all kinds of drunks. You get your happy drunks, sad drunks, aggressive drunks, and your blackout drunks. All can be annoying in their own way, but it's the aggressive and blackout drunks you want to watch out for and really don't want to have to deal with. It was past midnight and the celebrations for New Year's were finally dying down. It'd been a long and busy shift and I was tired and just ready for bed, but I knew we didn't really close until the last of the regulars had left. Plus, we had a lot of cleaning to do before I could even think of getting into bed. It was nearing 3 a.m. when the door to the bar opened. I looked over and saw a hooded figure walk in. Great, I thought, as we weren't letting anyone else in at this time. The person went straight to the bar and sat down on a stool with their head down. I went over to tell him that we were no longer letting people in and he would have to leave. But as they sat down, I could see them swaying sideways, back and forth, clearly very drunk. I went behind the bar in front of them and politely said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, but we're closing up shortly and we're not letting anyone else in, I'm afraid, so you'll have to leave." This seemed to fall on deaf ears, as the person didn't budge or look up, acknowledging I was even there. "Excuse me, did you hear me?" I questioned again, but still no response. Great, I thought. Another blackout had walked in. I was about to call my colleague over and have him remove this person when their hand suddenly banged down on the bar. The person's head began to lift up. The person looked slowly at me as they removed their hood, and now I could see it was a gaunt and creepy-looking middle-aged man whose eyes were wide and piercing as they looked at me. The way he stared blankly at me really creeped me out. Then after a good 30 seconds or so, he spoke.
"Give me one drink, and I'll be on my way. I will leave,"
he said. I told him the same thing as before, but as I was saying it, he cut me up.
"Please, just one drink, and I'll be on my way,"
he said again, emotionless. The way he stared at me really got under my skin. At this point, I didn't want any hassle or drama. In all honesty, I just wanted the man to be gone. So I agreed and asked him what he wanted, poured him his beer, and left to let him drink it. I went straight to my colleague Rob and notified him that after that beer, the man had to leave. The bar was pretty much empty now anyway. As I tidied, I noticed the man staring blankly at the wall as if he had zoned out. He had finished his beer and, unlike what he said, he'd not left and was still sitting there. I looked at Rob, who was making his way over to the man. I saw Rob speaking to him, and the man just stared into space as if Rob wasn't there. As Rob was about to tell the man again, he suddenly got up, turned around, and walked out. He was clearly drunk, but there was something off about the guy. I dealt with many drunks working in bars before, but that guy really creeped me out. But he'd finally left and the three of us could finally clean up and get ready to go home. As we closed up, I let Rob leave early as he cycled. Claire, my other colleague, was getting picked up by her boyfriend, so as we locked up, she called him to come and get her. I didn't drive myself, so I was ordering myself an Uber. We were standing outside when I checked my phone and noticed my Uber had typically stopped. In fact, it'd gone from 5 to 10 minutes. I guess it had pinged another driver. Claire offered to give me a ride home from her boyfriend. As grateful as I was, I declined it as she lived in the opposite direction and I didn't want to put them out of their way. I told her my Uber would be here in no time and not for her to worry. So as she took off, I checked my phone to see the Uber was still 9 minutes away. Not accepting Claire's offer was a decision I was about to regret. The street was cold and empty. I was alone and tired when out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. As I turned, I was shocked to see the figure of the creepy hooded man standing next to me. I jumped back. He must have come out from the alleyway next to the bar. He was staring straight at me without saying a word. The uncontrollable feeling of dread took over my body. I didn't quite know what to say as he stared straight back at me with those blank, dark eyes, when he suddenly spoke.
Got a cigarette?
My heart racing, I stuttered, "Sorry, no, as I didn't smoke." The man continued to just stare at me for about a minute, but it seemed like forever. The tone of his voice then changed as he asked me,
Why are you lying to me? I just want a cigarette.
I was taken back and frankly scared shitless, being on my own. I wasn't lying, I told him. I genuinely didn't smoke. He stood staring at me again for a good minute. I felt froze to the spot. The man then turned and walked off back down the street. I could feel the sweat of my palms clenching my phone as my heart raced. I looked at my phone, quietly pleading to myself for the Uber to just get here, but again it said 5 minutes. I wasn't willing to wait alone where I was, in fear of the man coming back, so I began to walk down the street in the opposite direction, hoping to run into my Uber as that's the way it was coming from. As I walked, I checked my phone again, looking behind me every few seconds. 3 minutes. It was almost here. The man was nowhere in sight. I stopped on the corner down the street from the bar, waiting to see my Uber, when the hairs on my neck stood on end. From behind me, the haunting sound of a creepy whistle broke out. It was the man again. Walking back down in my direction, he slowly walked, whistling as he stared straight at me, not even blinking. At this point, I was fearing for the worst, fearing what this creep wanted from me. Looking at my phone, my Uber was on the street less than a minute away. I could see headlights in the distance. It had to be the Uber. I began walking towards it, but as I did, fear consumed me. All I could hear behind me was the sound of running footsteps as I turned to see the man at full pelt sprinting after me. I screamed and ran as fast as my now jelly legs would take me towards the Uber. I literally ran out in front of it, waving my arms. It pulled to a stop as I banged on the door to get in. The driver let me in. Obviously, having seen the man behind me, he got out of his car, but the creep had taken off back down the street in the opposite direction. I had never been so scared in my life. I literally thought that was going to be it for me. The Uber dropped me off at home and I bolted all of my doors and windows. I informed the police about what had happened, but the man was never found. I had a week off from work after that in fear of seeing the man, but I did continue to work at the bar after that and never saw that creep again. Drunk or not, that man was crazy. And I sincerely hope no one has to experience what I did. That was the worst New Year's I have ever had, and his face still gives me the chills to this day. And that's gonna do it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please let us know by liking the video. It really helps us out. And don't forget to subscribe to Horror Motives and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a thing. If you have any comments or suggestions for future videos, let us know down in the comments. Until then, the fear lies within.